Welcome to today's edition of 3 Minute Halacha. There is a prevalent misconception that one can actually fulfill their obligation for Seudah Shlishit by learning Torah. Where did this come from? Most likely it came from the situation of an Erev Pesach that falls out on Shabbat. Erev Pesach, Shechaliot b'Shabbat. When this occurs, you can't eat bread or matzah in the afternoon, and therefore the obligation to eat Seudah Shlishit is very difficult to fulfill. Rashi in the Gemara and Psachim and Daf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, in fact, rules that on such an Erev Pesach on Shabbat, there's no obligation to eat Seudah Shlishit. However, many other rabbinic authorities disagree and suggest one of three proposals of how to fulfill the obligation of three Shabbat meals: not eating matzah because it's Erev Pesach, and not eating chametz beyond the time when it's prohibited. The first possibility is you divide the morning meal into two. You can have challah at both of them as long as you're eating the two meals before the prohibition of chametz sets in. The second is to have the third meal in the afternoon with an alternative form of matzah that can't be used at the Seder, such as egg matzah or matzahs that's cooked or fried. The third possibility is to have the meal in the afternoon just with fruit or meat or products made from potato starch. In other words, not even having anything that could be chametz. However, the Magen Avraham in Siman Taf Mem Daled Sif Katan Bet suggests a radically different option. He quotes the Shlam, who writes in the name of the Zohar from Parshat Emor that Rav Shimon Bar Yochai actually studied Kabbalah, the Maaseh Merkavah, in lieu of a third meal when Erev Pesach fell on Shabbat. So it seems that according to the Zohar, you could fulfill Seudah Shlishit with Torah study. However, the Gra in that same location disagrees, and he says the Zohar meant that Seudah Shlishit can't be fulfilled with anything but bread, but when Erev Pesach falls out on Shabbat and there's nothing else you can do, learn Torah. So too the Meiri rules that there's no obligation to eat Seudah Shlishit, similar to what Rashi had suggested, when Erev Pesach falls out on Shabbat. The Aruch HaShulchan explains this in a little bit more detail in Siman Taf Mem Daled Sif Vav, that just like Yom Kippur, if it falls out on Shabbat, there's no obligation of Shabbat meals. Similarly, on Erev Pesach, when it falls on Shabbat, the afternoon meal is canceled. The Kaf HaChaim, however, disagrees, and he says Rav Shimon Bar Yochai was unique. He was able to fulfill his obligation to eat Seudah Shlishit with learning Torah because he understood the Kabbalistic meaning behind the obligation and could fulfill the mitzvah through his learning. But the rest of us, writes the Kaf HaChaim, are obligated to eat a meal. In fact, there's a famous story told about Rabbi Yoshe ber Soloveitchik of Brisk, the great-grandfather of the Rav, who was once at an inn for Shabbat, and there was no lechem mishnah, there weren't challahs for Seudah Shlishit. One of the people who was with him asked, why don't we fulfill the obligation with Divrei Torah? Rav Soloveitchik responded that there's always a possibility that one of the Divrei Torah I'll offer will be refuted, and therefore we won't have Divrei Torah and we won't have food, and we should instead make sure to always eat Seudah Shlishit by eating food. Similarly, there's a position that suggests that the Chatam Sofer also fulfilled the mitzvah of Seudah Shlishit on Yom Tov when learning Torah. However, in his famous work, the Erev Pesach Shachal b'Shabbat, Rav Tzvi Cohen notes that actually the K'tzei Amatet is of the opinion that when the Chatam Sofer fulfilled his obligation of a third meal, it wasn't on Shabbat, but it was on Yom Tov when we only have two meals that are obligated.